Hello, everybody, and welcome to the new episode of Full Funnel Marketing Live. So today we have a new guest, Caitlin Purgoin from Customer Camp, and I'm super excited about this episode. As you know, Caitlin was our speaker at Full Funnel Summit, but unfortunately she couldn't join us live. So I'm super excited to bring this topic to you and discuss today the B2B buying journey, how to identify the buying triggers, how to adapt your marketing and basically create full funnel marketing operations based on how your customers are buying. And the reasons why I think this topic is extremely important is because lots of B2B companies create naive linear sales funnels, thinking that it's enough to hire a good copywriter, right? Purchase a good sales stack, basically outreach software that allows you to do multi-channel outreach and just write a creative copy and you'll generate opportunities. But the truth is that your cadence doesn't meet the buying cycle of your target accounts, right? It doesn't mean when you want to sell, it doesn't mean that your customers are ready to buy. And our goal is exactly identifying the buying intent, the buying triggers, right? And start prospecting these targets. And this is what we're going to discuss today. As always, you can ask your questions in a Zoom chat, or if you want to join the discussion live, feel free to switch on your camera and ask your questions. All questions will be covered. But first, Caitlin, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is obviously the topic I geek out about the most, so I'm delighted when other people are interested.
Yeah, I believe everybody would be interested. So I want to kick off our convo with just one simple question: how to run an effective customer research for B2B tech companies and basically understand how your customers are buying. Let's start with this and then we'll just...
All right. So this is something that, of course, I've spent an enormous amount of time on. And of course, there's kind of like the right way to do it, which is like, if you had all the resources in the world and you could use like the best case scenario, there's that way. And then there's the way that most companies actually do it, which is actually more realistic to how most businesses move. So in an ideal world, you would spend just an enormous amount of time before you start planning out your marketing strategy or even your product strategy, going off, doing tons of customer interviews, running surveys, validating what you're learning, gathering tons of data, and then making decisions. But in the real world where we live, that's not often an option. You need to gather data, make small bets with that data, learn what, get insights, figure out what might work, and you need to try things. So the way I describe the method that I often teach people, it's kind of like, imagine that you're walking along the beach and you've got a metal detector, right? You want to find gold, you want to find treasure on the beach. By doing quick customer interviews, by doing quick surveys, by kind of like going and continually learning from buyers, you can figure out where you want to dig holes. And sometimes you're going to dig a hole and you might find treasure, right? But sometimes you'll dig a hole and you'll find a pop can. So it's not a foolproof method. There really aren't foolproof methods when it comes to research, but it's much better than just randomly digging holes. So with that said, there's kind of like 4 methods that I would say you should try. And it all depends on the amount of access you have to customers, the amount of time that you have. My absolute favorite method, and the one that I talk about all the time, is customer interviews. But they're not customer interviews to ask them, like, what did you think of our product? Or like, we're going to launch this new feature and would you use it? Like, that's not the role of these interviews. The role is to really understand the buying journey in extreme detail and to start from like, what was going on in your world that made you first even realize you might have a problem, that you might need something new. And then walk me through from that moment, what I call the buying trigger, through to you actually eventually finding us, because you're certainly probably not the first thing they found or tried, but through all the other things you found, considered, tried, why those didn't work, how you found us, and then, talk to me about the experience. Did it meet your expectations? And so that is my absolute favorite method, because there is stuff you can get from a one-on-one conversation that you'll never get in other methods. But that takes a team that's open to having you talk to their customers. And if you're a, marketer for hire, consultant like we are, that's sometimes a little bit, you have to earn some trust before they'll let you talk to customers. And it takes willing customers who want to talk to you. And if there are people that, just don't love your product, they're not really excited about it, sometimes it can be tricky to find people. So that is my absolute favorite method. It's not the only one. If you can't do that, my next favorite method is going off and actually doing review mining. So look and see where people are talking about either your product or products that you might compete with. And what are they saying? And I will pull information out of those reviews. I'll look for, what was the pains that they had that had them seek the solution? What were they hoping to achieve? What was like the benefit that they got, their selfish desires that were achieved? What were they really trying to get done? If you think about it from a jobs to be done perspective, like what was the job they were trying to achieve? And then also like, if they talk about it, which they sometimes will, most often won't, like what was the buying trigger? In reviews, you won't often get those buying triggers, but you sometimes can. So that's another method I love. And of course, you can do surveys. I've got kind of a jobs to be done style survey I'll send out to folks. You can do those as one survey. You can put it as a survey that pops up on the pages where you want to learn from folks. So there's different methods. But really, as I said, my favorite absolute method, in-depth interview with somebody who's recently bought from you, because nobody is going to have the insight that those people have.
Exactly. This is what we are preaching at fullfunnel.io. And we always say this is the only one way to understand how your customers are buying. The second benefit is basically you can identify the buying committee structure, right? During the negotiations, you basically deal with 1-2 people, maybe at the later stages, somebody else might join from the buying committee. But the truth is that you have no clue what's happening inside your prospects, right? You send a proposal or you send whatever, like the product overview or service overview, whatever it could be, right? And you have no idea what questions, let's say your champion person that had a demo call with you, what questions this person have heard from their colleagues, from their peers, right? What questions did CEO or CFO asked, right? So what kind of information did they request? Did they ask about comparison report, right? What's the difference between your product and alternatives, right? Or what alternatives were considered, right? That's the first group of questions. The second one is basically with whom, with what products did they compare your product, right? So you can understand better the competition, because quite often it could be, you can think about competitor X or competitor Z, but they could think about completely different solutions, right? This is something that you need to evaluate. And also the insights about how do they search for product like yours. This is something that you have mentioned. Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things you touched on, which I want to flag is so important, is there are always trade-offs in every buying decision. We are making trade-offs. It's so rare that we find something and we go, oh my God, this is like everything I ever wanted. Because oftentimes the trade-off might be you get all the things you want, but it's expensive. Or you get half the stuff you want, but it fits in the budget. Or you get like, you really would have liked this feature to be there, but it's not worth giving up this, and this feature. So you're fine to go without it and you'll find a workaround. And as as product teams, understanding those trade-offs is massive, because it can also allow you to know who are our people and who aren't. Because if there are trade-offs that they're unwilling to make, and those are, maybe features that aren't as relevant to the majority of your customers, then do you build it just for that small segment of people? Or do you say, no, those aren't our people. We're going to go deep here and we're going to be really, really good at this. And that means that we're going to have to say no to people that care about that. And so understanding the trade-offs is so big, because one, it can help you in your marketing copy. Like, how do you help them overcome those objections? And two, it can help you to figure out who aren't our people. Because in the beginning, especially when you're trying to grow and figure out product market fit and everything, you're still trying to figure out who your people are. And that takes, putting things in front of them and learning from them. And, I wish that there was this foolproof way to do it every single time, but really it's an iterative discovery phase.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. And you know what? The truth is that most B2B companies never do customer interviews or have never done customer interviews. So they have just some assumptions on how their customers might buy the products or services, right? Mm-hmm. And what's the value they're getting and why did select this company as a vendor, whatever, right? But these are the assumptions. Let's make a quick test. We have 42 people in the room. Guys, type in a Zoom chat plus if your company is running customer interviews and minus if you have never done them or your company is not
Great
running.
question. And I'll just drop a stat that to me was like, whoa. And I'd like to hear some newer research on this because it's from 2018, I believe. But ProfitWell did a massive survey with a lot of the people that are using their product. Of course, they have subscription-based companies, primarily SaaS. And they asked them, how many of you are talking to 10 or more customers a month for non-sales reasons? So not talking to them to try to sell them, but to learn from them. And it turned out that 70% of the people they surveyed were not doing 10 or more of these conversations a month. And the ones that were doing them, that 30%, they were growing on average 2 to 3 times faster than the other 70%. So it's like, what the hell? Like if you can be like doubling or tripling your growth, why aren't people doing it? And I've been grappling with that and talking about this for years now. And I've zeroed in on the reason I think they're not doing it, which is because for one, like they think that they have to do it in this perfect, incredibly structured way. And that if they don't do it that way, it's not worth doing at all. It's like, oh, you can't talk to 1 or 2 customers. You're just going to get a couple of anecdotes. You can't really trust those. And it's like, so you'd rather trust guessing from the team, an internal bias, than having just a couple of conversations if that's all you have capacity and resources to do. And so they don't do it because they think it has to be this very scientific method. Of course, it's great if you can do it that way, if you have those resources. Lots of teams now are recognizing how critical this is. They're hiring full-time research teams. Like it's something they're baking into the DNA of their company. But in the beginning, it's better to make progress with your research than to do it perfect. So if you're getting pushback from leadership that you don't have time to do it because you can't do it the right way, then talk to them about the trigger technique, which is one of the things we're going to talk about, which you really don't need to do a lot of customer interviews to be able to extract some really, really compelling insights that you can use to lead marketing. So we can talk a little bit more about this, but I promise you, like you do not, like as long as you're making conversations a regular cadence, you don't need to do 30. Like, do a regular cadence, take some of what you learn, update your web copy, change your outreach message. Like it's an iterative, experimental process. It's better, again, to make progress through a small sample size of customers than to not do it at all for fear of it not being done perfectly.
One quick question to wrap up the topic of customer research. So I checked the answers in the chat and the answers were split. So 50-50, let's say. Half of folks are running customer interviews, half of them are not running interviews. And the most common question, which I'm hearing when I'm introducing the idea of customer interviews, is basically, we have never done this. So what's in here for our clients and how can we motivate our clients to spend, 30 minutes, 40 minutes with us to answer all of these questions, provide unique insights, and who should be in charge of these interviews?
Okay, so to answer the first question, depending on who your customers are and what your product is, of course, some of you might have no problem getting people that are very enthusiastic about what you do because they're like your super fans and they would love to talk to you. And you might just have to reach out to them via email. So my husband uses Shopify for his business. We were approached by one of their internal researchers. Like she set it up so that the ask was to do a call and there was a limited number of calls she wanted to do. I think there was a gift card. So I think she always was offering a gift card of some sort, but she wanted to do 30 interviews. Now remember, Shopify, massive multi-billion-dollar company. And I saw her email come in, and as a customer discovery nerd myself, I was like, okay, like I'm going to respond to her. I'll jump on a call with her. I'd love to hear how she does it. And I waited about an hour and a half. And by the time I clicked on the link, all of the sessions were gone. So, if you're Shopify and you've got super, super like true blue fans, you might have to do very little to get people on the call with you. If you're an early stage company where your product is still kind of like finding its way and it's not something that makes a enormous life-changing like impact in your customers' lives as of yet, you might struggle a little bit more to get people to say yes. Your people might be busy. They might not want to give the time. And so what I say is like, firstly, try to automate your outreach sequence. So I saw a great example of this. One of the people who bought, we've got this product called our Clarity Call Cheat Sheets, which teaches people how to do interviews. And I tell them, automate your outreach sequence. Like once figure out who you want to talk to and automate the request. And so she's in the e-com space. She sells physical products. By the time somebody buys 3 times from her, they get a personal email from her requesting the opportunity to chat with them for an interview. I think she gives a coupon so that they can use in the store. Obviously, they're happy buyers, and she gets tons of people putting their hand up that way. So figure out first, if you can automate it, who do you want to talk to and how do you ask those people at the right time? One way to go about it can be asking them to do a quick survey first. And the survey is actually less of a survey where you're really going to be using the insights from the survey to do things, but it's actually more of kind of like a prospecting thing for you. So you ask them some questions so that they can identify themselves and some of their challenges. You know what kind of people you want to talk to. And then at the end of the survey, you ask them, would you be open to an interview? And maybe with it, like I'd love to offer you an incentive, a donation to your favorite charity, something like that. And then people that filled out the survey have essentially told you who they are and what their challenges are, and then they've opted in to a conversation. So that can be a way to go about it as well. So start with a survey with the final question being, will you be open to an interview? And your last question, which is a big one, and it really, I guess it depends on your purpose for doing interviews, who should be doing these interviews. I would say it's great when they can be done, like if marketing, I think, should be doing them. Marketing right now, way too often is relying on sitting in on sales calls to get their insights from customers. And no offense to their incredibly talented sales partners, but like what happens in a sales call and what happens in a just like, I want to learn about you conversation is totally different. People on sales calls have their guard up. They are trying to decide if they want, how much information they want to reveal. They're not sharing everything. They are still, they still are kind of like probably have objectives that they want to achieve. And like, it's just not the same environment as somebody who's actually then made the decision to say yes to a conversation. So if you've got the leadership saying, yes, let's do these, what can work really well if you've got the structure on the team is you get somebody from marketing and somebody from product and they lead them together. And the marketer does the question asking, the digging in, the diving, like getting them to kind of like reveal those nitty gritty details about their experience. The product person is also listening and they're taking notes. And if a question comes up that they want to dig in on, they're answering. But then when the customer you just talked to is off the phone, now you've got somebody that you can jam with and be like, did you hear this? And they'll be like, oh, did you pick up on that? Because guaranteed, when you're leading the interview yourself, really neat things will come out that you might miss because you're thinking about, well, what am I going to ask next? Or you go in a different direction with your questions than maybe the person in product would have done. So that can be a really neat way to do it, is have somebody from product and somebody from marketing, because then afterwards the ideas that can come, because you're both thinking about it from your own selfish perspective of like, the marketer's like, well, how can I get more people? And the product's like, well, how can I keep more people? And like, so you end up coming up with, you hear different things that are really meaningful to the company.
Yeah, awesome. I love this. Thank you. Let's move forward and let's touch the buying triggers. And basically, this was our promise to deliver that topic, right? And discuss basically how can you identify the buying triggers. And the next one is how can you adapt your marketing to capture the demand, right? And create this demand for customers that are not aware of your product. So share with us your framework on identifying the buying triggers, please.
So again, like thinking about how, my goal in the last several years has been, how do I make research sexy? Like, it is not sexy right now. It is something that like people feel like they have to do or they should do, but they don't necessarily want to do. It takes a lot of time to dig through all the data and decide how you're going to present it and what story you're going to tell and if you're going to present it. And it feels like drudgery. Like once you get those insights that you act on and you get the wins, you're like, hell yeah. But the process to get there, it feels like you're going to the dentist, and nobody wants to go to the dentist. They want the clean teeth. And so with the trigger technique, basically it is a step-by-step process to turn customer stories into actual marketing campaigns. And so the goal is you go out and you do, let's just say, one customer interview with an ideal customer, somebody who's like, we want more buyers like this person. And you dig in and you ask them to kind of give you the details of their buying journey from that, again, that moment, like what triggered you to begin, to realize you might need a new solution. And you ask them all of these questions and you kind of are pulling information out of them. And you're basically getting them to recreate the timeline of from when I first realized I might have a problem through to buying from you. That's kind of like the critical piece. And then of course you want to learn a little bit their experience with your product, but not as much time as needs to be spent there from a marketing perspective. They often will come into the interview thinking that that's what you're going to want to talk about, and be surprised when you actually want to talk much more about what led up to the purchase. And so through those conversations, you're going to gather lots and lots of valuable information. And one of the challenges that marketers were having was, I feel like I'm drinking through a fire hose. What's useful and important and what's not? How do I know what I should be taking note of? How do I know what I don't need to think about? Because I'm just getting so much. And so the concept of the trigger technique framework is you're really listening for four things. You want to know, what was the trigger event? What led them to begin the buying journey in the first place? You want to know, what job were they actually trying to get done? And anybody who's listening that's familiar with jobs to be done is a theory for understanding why people choose products. Essentially, the concept is we don't buy things, we hire them to do a job. If they work well, then we're going to keep using them. We're going to tell people about them. We're going to be happy. If our job changes, we'll look for something new to hire. If they don't work well, we'll fire them and look for something new to hire. So what job were they trying to get done? What pains did they have with other solutions? Because again, they're only comparing you to alternate solutions. Like in their mind, if there's nothing to compare you to, it's nearly impossible to make a decision. So they might not be comparing you to who you think they would compare you to. You know, one of the running jokes in SaaS is that for a lot of SaaS companies, their number one competitor is Excel, but they're comparing you to something else. And what were their pains with those other solutions? And then what were their selfish desires? And when people hear this, they go, does that really work in B2B? And I'm like, hell yeah, it works in B2B, because in B2B, there's all of this internal politics. There's all of this stuff going on. And like, yeah, I want to recommend the best software for my company, but I also have selfish reasons for why I'm going to recommend what I'm going to recommend, right? How is it going to make me look? Is it going to save me time? Am I going to be able to get done every day at 5 and go to watch my kids' basketball game if we get this piece of software? So like understanding the team's selfish desires. And in a B2B purchase, oftentimes that means having multiple interviews where you can pull those out because different team members have different ones. Then you can get a lot of insight there. So those are the four things: the trigger, the job, pains with other solutions, selfish desires. Once you pull those four things out of a conversation, what you have is really like the building blocks of creating something beautiful. So like I say, it's kind of like having like your Lego blocks. You can do anything with these cornerstone insights. So if you think about like, you know, the trigger and the job and where those might overlap, you can figure out which target buyer you might want to go after, because who else might experience a trigger event like that, right? Who else might have a similar job to be done? That helps you figure out a target buyer. Then this is the one that I kind of get excited about, that you don't hear a lot of marketers talking about. But the next thing I get people to think about is, well, what were the target moments? If we want to get in front of those target buyers, what moments are going on in the real world where we might be able to get in front of them? And if you think about the job they're trying to get done, you think about their pains with other solutions, suddenly you might start seeing opportunities that your competitors are not thinking about, like things that are not even on their radar, ways to get in front of them way earlier. Because if they're telling you about their whole buyer's journey, oftentimes there's insights there that just are not showing up on, if you're trying to do attribution, like these are things that are not showing up in your attribution software. For an example, to give kind of an example from the B2B world, I was doing a bunch of research with a client, Lead Sift. They allow you to basically identify prospects. It's account-based marketing, and they help you identify prospects that might be showing intent signals to buy. And going off and talking to a bunch of their customers, one of the things that I learned was that one of the triggers that got their ideal buyers to consider looking for a solution like theirs was that they saw a competitor had just raised a bunch of money, or a competitor had just brought on some like C-level person that was like known to be like a killer in the industry. And they were like, oh crap, like now they have more money than we do. What are we going to do? Or they just raised a bunch of money. Maybe they're going to come after us. And so because of what Lead Sift allows you to do, it allows you to identify these intent triggers, that we were able to put together a campaign that would reach out to, let's say, for comparison, like we're talking about ConvertKit, which is an email software solution, and MailChimp. When MailChimp was in the news, we could then identify that as a signal, reach out to the ConvertKit folks and be like, hey, like your competitor just raised a bunch of money, like they're probably going to be like, you might need to be watching them a little bit more closely. Like, do you want to be able to know when your ideal buyers are looking to use a solution like yours? And the outreach was like, we started getting way more responses because people were like, oh shit, because they noticed that announcement about the competitor raise. And we changed the messaging on the landing page to steal leads from your competitors. And like the conversions 3x. And they weren't just like more people coming in for demos, they were more of the right people that converted and stayed on as customers. So like when you understand what those target moments are, it's not about the channel necessarily. It's not about, do we go through email or LinkedIn or whatever? It's like, what moment are people most like potentially compelled to want to hear from us? With those two things in mind, you can then come up with ideas, like our idea to change the copy on the landing page, and like our idea to reach out to people whose competitors are in the news. And those ideas, you can then use the trigger technique and what you learned from your interviews to figure out the right call to action and the right messaging. So I'm doing an actual like whole talk on this today with Tony Ulwick from Stratagen. He's one of the original Jobs to be Done pioneers, and there will be a recording of that and a replay. So I'll make sure that I share that with you, and then anybody who's listening to this podcast can go check that out as well, because we'll go through that in a lot more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. For you guys who are now with us, I will send you an email with the recording of this session, and I will also include the link to that talk so you could join or at least listen to the recording. And if you are listening the recording of the session, just check the description, so you'll find that link in the description. So that was brilliant, I would say. I love it. And the example of ConvertKit and MailChimp, that's really awesome. I would love to ask you one precise example. So let's say if you do this interview, right, and you hear generic answers, something like, well, like my executives were not satisfied. Let's say we are reaching out to marketers. Let's make a precise example. And they say, okay, so our executives were not satisfied with marketing performance, and they challenged us to generate more leads. Something that quite often B2B companies, the most common challenge, right? So how could you leverage that insight and try to understand what was really happening, right? How would you play with it?
I love that you're asking this about people giving kind of generic or like not really helpful answers. Because one thing I will share is that becoming a good interviewer, it is a skill, and you're not going to be good at it right away. You're probably going to suck at it right away. And so it's something that you need to kind of work on and develop, just like anybody in sales would be working all the time on getting better at their approach to sales. But what I would do is I'd dig in and go, okay, so like people weren't happy. Like what was going on? Like what was driving that? Was it that they were trying to raise money and their metrics were just looking really bad to potential investors? Was it that a new quarter had started and that got everyone to look at the numbers and go, okay, like we missed our numbers for last week, or last quarter, let's do this now. So you want to dig in and go, like, what was the thing that triggered that? Is it that, the runway is getting low and they've only got like 4 months worth of runway in the bank? So there's something that happened beyond, leadership just being like marketing's not doing well enough. And oftentimes those things might be time-based, like doing annual planning, quarterly planning, which can give you a good signal to be able to go off of depending on when you're doing your outreach. And sometimes they're going to be things that, while they may not be happening on the, at the same time of year for all of your different prospects, there's signals that they might be happening for a prospect. Again, like maybe they raise money and now VCs expect them to grow. So, you can tell when people are raising, that's an intense signal you can be tracking. And so there's a really great blog post actually by Sales. I don't know what the company is. They do like B2B intent signals, but it's like through their website is sales.rocks, and I'll find the article and share it with you, and you can share it with the team. But it breaks down all of these different B2B intent signals, and all of them probably aren't going to be relevant to you, right? Depending on what business you're in, depending on what product you sell, most of them might not be relevant to you. But once you start to figure out the ones that are driving your customer and you dig in, like, it's often like they say in research to ask why 5 times. Like, don't literally do that because the person you're talking to will get annoyed with you. Yeah. But ask like, oh, tell me more about that. Or that was interesting. Well, what made that decision? Like, why did that seem like the right decision? And keep kind of like digging down, because like you'll get to this place that is far, far more compelling. And often you'll get to this place where there's real emotion, raw emotion, and emotion is what drives people to make decisions, whether we would like to admit that or not. And so leveraging that emotion is going to be far more compelling. I was doing an interview for our internal purposes with a startup founder, and he had decided to start doing customer discovery about one of our products, and I wanted to understand like what was going on. So he was telling me, and again, like he was giving me kind of like surface level answers initially, and I kept kind of going and I kept pulling to get answers and kind of going down. And eventually I got to this place where he shared this really kind of like intimate story about not being able, like, laying awake, literally not able to sleep, and writing his team on Slack and being like, I'm sick, because he could not face them because he was like feeling like he did not know what the next step was for growth. And he went to the local library by himself, like, on 2 hours sleep, and just started writing stuff down, and all of it. And he was like, it was like, this is all here and none of this feels real because I don't know from our customers like that. And he had this epiphany and he was like, I need to ask the customers. And that was the thing. So like this story of like a literal sleepless night and trying to pull everything you could out of your own head and recognizing that you don't have the answers, like that, for me, from a marketing perspective, that could be really compelling, right? And that's going to be more compelling than talking about stats and data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's a lot of founders that have had those sleepless nights.
Absolutely. Stefan, please go ahead.
One second. Hey, Kathleen, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I hope the weather is fine where you're at. Where are you at in the US?
I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Oh wait, sorry, you're in Canada. Oh my God.
I am.
Sorry. All right, sorry. Okay, I hope you're enjoying your your hockey tonight. My question is the following. So I have a client who is a syndication software, basically. So they work with real estate companies, and right now we're focusing more on smaller syndicators, like people who've done 1 or 2 million in a few deals, and they're looking for like software. As you mentioned.
Just to be clear, is it realtors you're selling to?
Or
brokers, or
no, like it's like people who are getting into real estate, if you want to say that,
like so individuals.
Yeah, real estate crowdfunding, you can call it like real estate crowdfunding.
Okay.
So I'm like a part-time real estate agent, and I'm a medic, or I'm a doctor, right, or something like that. And for me, because we're focusing on SMBs right now, because we can't really close mid-level. Like they need a lot of features, blah, blah, blah. We're not closing them. And I'm looking at basically at intent from LinkedIn right now, like people who like influencers posts, like go to events, that sort of stuff. And I've went through a few companies like Discover.org and like, who sell intent data, and there is like nothing for small for small guys like me,
Mhm.
And I was thinking, are there any triggers is there something I'm missing? Are there any triggers that
I would say the intent data by, the first party intent data may not be there in this case, it might be harder to find, but what's happening in the environment that might cause intent? So for instance, the stock market crashed last week. I bet you a lot of people are thinking right now about diversifying their portfolios. I know that I am. So, and you're talking about crowdfunding, like real estate, is it that individuals can buy in on real estate projects? So there's probably a lot of people right now who might be users of platforms like Wealthsimple, which is a investment platform here in Canada, or Questrade, who are looking at their portfolios, feeling nervous, thinking about, the market's going to be really erratic right now. Maybe I should be diversifying. Maybe I should be putting funds into something else that's going to be more stable. So I'd say it's not always on an individual level, but maybe things are happening in the real world that are affecting the way that people are making decisions. So that could be time-wise, in a time of great instability where there just was that bump, even as hopefully the market corrects whatever they say is going to happen. Hopefully, there's that reminder, that pain of that fear. Like I'm looking at my portfolio right now and it's down like 15%.
Okay.
And that's nerve-wracking, right? And so I would say, the triggers might not be the individual, I'm going to go out and reach out to that person because of this, but the trigger could be something that's happening on a much broader scale that they're being affected by, and that now when you reach out to them, it's meaningful. For instance, I was talking with a company, they sell these very specific type of attachment for big machinery for digging ditches, right? Very specific thing. And it was like, well, what are our triggers? Like, how do we know what our triggers are? It's like, well, what kind of environment needs to use this thing? And they're like, well, places where there's a lot of rain and so there's like a specific geography that now we're going to target. They're like, yeah, I guess there is. And I'm like, and when might they need to dig ditches? Like, oh, well, if they're doing roadway projects or if there's like a new fire, and I'm like, and how would you find out if there's new roadway projects? Are those announced? Like, let's say we're looking at particular cities like Seattle, it's known for being rainy. Like, do they announce those on the local government website? Well, yeah, they put them out to tender. Well, okay, so now we're starting to see the companies that are actually bidding on these projects, and you have a product that can actually help them to do those projects more efficiently and actually charge the same. Now you have some prospects, right? So it's like thinking about why, again, like what's the job to be done? And in the case of the investors that are using your platform, there's probably a fear mindset right now around security, protecting our investments, making sure that we have enough, and that you don't capitalize on that is not the right word, but you're offering a really good solution to people that have that fear mindset. And so making sure that they know about it and crafting your message so it aligns with the fear that they already know that they have.
We'll dig deeper, huh? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I had something similar in mind. Yeah, we were going through an exercise that Andre has about like demand gen and like business triggers, and fantastic. Maybe he's gonna make a workshop around that, or like a YouTube video. But it's amazing how good it is. And I was going through it with my team, like to dig deeper, and at the end, everybody was like, "Oh Jesus, it was so hard. I hope you guys use it in marketing." I'm like, "Hell yeah, we're gonna use it." Yeah?
I love that.
Thank you. There is one more question coming from Susan, and Susan asks, do you have a method for how to drill down when interviewing customers, and basically how do you know when you have reached gold?
So, I mean, oftentimes you'll know because you'll just know, you'll have they'll start using emotional words. Like if you're doing a video call, their body language might change a little bit, or they'll start talking they'll start being really excited, or they'll they'll slow down. They'll be like, "Oh, that was a pain." You'll hear it oftentimes in their voice. But I don't have the method is more so the line of questioning. So with my Clarity Call cheat sheets, I give you a script of questions you can ask, but this script is a guide. It's like the goal is to always have something there that you can ask next, but it's not ask this question and this question and this question. And that's the mistake a lot of people make. They go into these interviews with 10 questions and they ask those 10 questions and that's it. Like you want to be able to find the story. You're thinking like a detective, right? And you're trying to get all of the details of the story. And so I have what I call like my deep dive questions. And I named a few of them before, but like one of my favorite ones is just interesting. Tell me more about that. Because then they're going to take the line of conversation in a direction that they think makes sense. And it might not have been the way you were thinking they were going to go. And it might actually open up this whole other like opportunity to learn about something that is relevant, but you wouldn't have thought to ask about. So interesting. Tell me more about that. When they mention something painful, remember like pain is opportunity. So be like, oh, that sounds like it really bothers you. Like, tell me why that's a big deal. And then they'll get into the details. Or if they sound excited about something that was good that was happening and they hoped would happen, like, oh, you seem really excited about that. Like, why was that exciting? And so asking questions where it just encourages them to go deeper is really the approach. And because you can think of this, like I call them an interview, but when I'm reaching out to prospects, I'll usually call it a chat because it's going to feel very informal. If it feels like they just sat through like a phone interview with like your telecom company, you didn't do it right. Like it shouldn't feel like that.
Thank you. Thank you. I would love to dedicate the last part of our chat to the buying journey and basically how to adapt your marketing to the way how your customers are buying. You have shared this brilliant example about leveraging account-based marketing insights. I would love to ask you if you can break down any kind of, let's say, this full funnel marketing case study saying these were the insights that were collected via customer interviews.
I don't have it in front of me right now, but I have a basically a buyer journey cheat sheet. It comes with the customer with the Clarity Call cheat sheets. But essentially, what it does is I break down again the goal is to understand the different stages of your customer's buying journey, and not like oftentimes I actually did a thread about this. A couple of weeks back. I'll share a link to that, a Twitter thread where I broke down the buyer's journey. Because like when we think about the buyer's journey, for so long, people were talking about all the interactions that the customer had with their brand. And that is such a missed opportunity, because if you're only looking at the way that they're interacting with your brand, you're missing out on all of this other valuable stuff that could be helping you to get in front of people sooner and less crowded channels with like better messages. And so when I talk with the buyer's journey, it has these steps. There is the trigger event. What kind of like led them to realize that, have that kind of like aha moment of I might need something new. Typically that's a frustrating or painful event, but it doesn't always push them immediately to like jump on Google and start looking for solutions, right? Like oftentimes what it does do is they start passively looking, meaning that they start noticing things that maybe they wouldn't have noticed before. So they're on, LinkedIn and they're scrolling and like they see a post from somebody, they go, oh, that's interesting. And they read it. And before that trigger event, they wouldn't have read that post. They would have scrolled right by it. It wouldn't have been relevant to them. So they're not actively looking yet, but they are starting to notice things. Then some type of catalyst will happen that will push them into actively looking. That catalyst is typically something, again, something painful. Maybe it's a deadline that's happening. Maybe they have, a fight with somebody because like the project didn't go as planned and they're like, frig it, we really need to get this new thing. And so once that catalyst happens, then they'll go into almost like this like infinity loop of like evaluating things and exploring things, exploring, evaluating. And they're going to look at solutions like yours, maybe that would be considered direct competitors of yours, but they're also going to look at other solutions like, well, maybe we could hire a virtual assistant to do it. Or maybe we could, get, maybe if we didn't solve this problem, we could just put more money into this thing and that would solve the problem. So they're going to look at a bunch of different stuff and evaluate stuff. And they can stay in that loop of kind of like explore and evaluate for a while. Usually something needs to happen again, another catalyst that pushes them into deciding. They will then buy a product. They have the kind of their short list in mind and they will use it and they will evaluate it and they'll say, did I get what I was expecting? Am I satisfied? Is the job done? Do I see that this will work for me in the future? If it is, great. They're going to start using it. They're going to be happy with it. They'll stick with it. If it's not, then they're going to fire it and go back into that kind of explore and evaluate loop, trying to look for other solutions. And so I actually have like a cheat sheet that kind of breaks down like what you can think about as a marketer at each stage of that. But what I can share is that the real big opportunities when it comes to like discovery is at the trigger event and those catalysts. because like you can, like if you can figure out what the trigger event and those catalysts are, you can be really timely. Again, you can figure out those target moments and you can be there in those target moments. But the things that you're learning about, like kind of like the passive looking, it's like, well, where are these people spending time, right? Because if they're not actively looking for my solution yet, but I know that they're interested in these types of topics or they're hanging out in these types of online communities, well, that gives me some insight as to what type of, content marketing I might want to do in those places. And then once they do start exploring and evaluating options, how do they do that? What did they look at before they looked for a solution like yours? Like, for instance, if somebody's buying a sleep mask, they might look at melatonin pills before they buy the sleep mask. And so rather than competing on sleep mask for Google AdWords, you could see going after melatonin pills, and maybe that's cheaper, right? Maybe you can get in front of people sooner and show them why your product's actually better than an alternative they've looked for that isn't the same solution as yours. So once you kind of like figure out the different stages of the journey and you're getting all the information, there's different things that you should do along those different stages, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So basically, in some cases, you need to create the demand, right? So there is no demand, but you should be in the channels where your customers are looking for information, where they are consuming information, right? And with the help of content, could be organic. Could be paid,
you've been doing a phenomenal job of this with all of your material on Fullfunnel, because I think that, especially on LinkedIn, people are on LinkedIn. They're not necessarily there looking for content on Fullfunnel. Like they might have been,
absolutely.
They might be now. But before, you started talking about it all the time and really making this a piece of what you do. Like people, there was probably less familiarity with it. And so you're where they are when they're passively looking. You know what their problems are, which is that their marketing's not converting. They know that they're not hitting the goals that they like to be hitting. So you know what the pain points are. And then you can show up where they're passively looking and kind of like educate them more and more on the problem. And I'm really geeky about like buyer psychology, behavioral economics stuff. I write a newsletter on this called Why We Buy, but there's also something known as like the mere exposure effect, right? Like the more we're exposed to something, the more we come to like and trust it. So the first time somebody sees you talking about Fullfunnel, they're like, I don't know who that guy is. I don't really know what Fullfunnel is. Like maybe whatever, but like, it's kind of interesting, but whatever. But then you keep showing up, right? And you keep showing up and you keep talking about it and you keep teaching more and revealing more. And then more and more, they start to go, oh, well, maybe Fullfunnel is the approach that we should be taking. And then when that catalyst happens, maybe, it's the beginning of the quarter again, and they need to come up with a new marketing strategy and their channels aren't working. They're like, okay, guys, we need to go back to the drawing board here. Maybe we need to take a Fullfunnel approach. So it's like, we wish that our customers' buying journey reflected our goals and timelines, but it reflects theirs.
Yeah, thank you so much. Jan, please go ahead. Yeah, just a second.
Thank you. Hey, there is a fellow Anouk here. I'm also in Montreal, so the other coast.
Oh, awesome.
And my question is, I am very lucky to have already started developing a lot of insights with up to 4 months of different stats backing that up. So we have revenue, we have pipelines, we have different stats backing up that buyer's journey that starts to show. And the question is, how flexible do you recommend being that ICP definition versus the insights that are starting to speak on themselves? Like, as I said before, for example, the trigger, they are statistically meaningful at this point. So how can I just present that case to really make better our ICP, to make it like encompass everything that we've been discovering, so it does not only sleeps on the marketing execution side, but it also feels the rest of the company?
Right. Good question. When it comes to the ICP, like I'm to be honest, like I'm always adjusting how I approach this, because I think that oftentimes, for one thing, a lot of ICPs don't have useful data in them. They often have a bunch of like demographic or firmographic stuff. So it's like, the company size of this, like the company size is this, blah, blah. None of that matters really. Not that none of that matters, because it totally does when it comes to like targeting. Figuring that stuff out for your targeting is really important, but that's not why people buy things, right? Like I don't buy stuff because I'm a 37-year-old woman who lives in Canada. Like there's other things that are going on. So I would say when it comes to your ICPs, oftentimes we're told like, just start with one customer and like, just target that customer. But like that I often will lean the other way and go like, start with like one job, like something like you can really do really, really well. And then identify like who cares a lot about that, like, and who is our, like, who's our product like differentiatedly better for, and then start there. So April Dunford has some really, really good content on this. Yeah. So
Totally done there.
Yeah,
the question is precisely, it is diverting kind of in the conversation of, should we map the job based on the product feature, SaaS B2B platform, or should we do it around like a day in the life of a person kind of approach? Like, do we want to go after a job title because that function has a specific set?
How are you using these ICPs? What are they
so
for?
We basically are differentiating efforts in terms of the team and in terms of sales velocity. We're also mixing channels, for example, SDR touches or not. And we're also including partners within the negotiations. So we might get credits as a part of a partnership network, or we might get free seats, or we might skip the demos because we have a free trial version for up to this many.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're using them to make decisions about what your sales is going to look like, what you're like, what you're kind of like, whether you're going to be like product led or not. So are they?
Yeah, like if we go very heavily into like pushing for sales, or if we leave them more organically paced out because we understand there is already an engagement.
So you're wondering, should they be day in the life or jobs based? Like, I think ultimately, like, to give you a jobs to be done answer, like, it depends. Like, it depends what you're trying to do with them, right? And so what you might end up finding is that if the sales team is going to use them this way, and if the customer success team is going to use them this way, and if the product success team cares about this stuff, you end up having 3 versions, right? One that is compelling to those people, because what ends up happening oftentimes is that marketing gets really excited about creating sexy ICPs, and they end up becoming these really long documents that like have a lot of information that might not be that relevant to anybody in the work that they do. So what I would say is like, look at who's going to be using them and for what. If they're like a central source of truth for like your product team, what does the product team care about, and build them out that way, right? Maybe it's a 1-page document. What does the sales team care about? Build them out that way. Like that way they can have the right ICP to match how they're going to use it to drive success. So take a jobs to be done approach in that the ICP itself is targeted to the job of the user of the ICP, if that makes sense.
Internally. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for really good and tough question, I would say. Yeah, but this convo was brilliant. Guys, I would love to ask you, how was this episode for you? Was it insightful? Did you get something new out of it? Did you get some fresh ideas? Let me know in the comments. And meanwhile, just a quick announcement that we are going to host the 3rd edition of Fullfunnel Summit. And this year we are going to host it the last week of March, and Caitlin would be one of the speakers.
Yay!
So yeah, this event would be again free for you to attend. We didn't announce it yet. I just published before the Christmas holidays about it on LinkedIn, and we have 1,000 people in a waiting list. So I'm going to drop a link to that summit. You can save your you can save your seat, of course. I will send you an email with a link, and make sure that you'll sign up for Caitlin's session. And thanks a lot for your feedback. I'm happy to hear that it was insightful. It's because of Caitlin, of course, because of our fantastic guest. I will send you a link to the recording. I will send you a link to Caitlin's newsletter and the talk that she's going to do
that one
later today.
If you want to come live today, that's happening in an hour and a half. I posted about it on Twitter, so you can go sign up there, but it's with Tony Alwook, who's one of the pioneers of Jobs to Be Done. He works with a lot of big software companies, or like on big engineering projects, using jobs as a way to help them create the right product. Really, really brilliant human. I'm excited to get to learn from him myself as well. And that's happening at 1:30 Eastern time. And you can find out more about it on my Twitter. And George, I saw that you just grabbed our cheat sheets. Thank you so much. And you'll hear from me again in 2 weeks to see that you did your interviews, and you better come back and say you did. So, and if you have any questions about anything, let me know.
Cool. Thank you so much. And guys, thanks a lot for joining us, for your engagement. Make sure that you joined our Slack community, and see you in 1 week, next Thursday, 5 p.m. with Ryan Staley about accelerating enterprise deals. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.